All right, we're here this week. Who's running the show this morning?
So we have Ebony Mon and we have Venom Hulk.
And this is the
symbiote.
He's the great persuader from the Guardians.
In the comic book, technically, he said not to have superpowers.
Yeah, he didn't have superpowers in the comic books.
Well, we don't know exactly because he convinced Thanos, he convinced the son of Thanos to follow him. He convinces everybody. So, is that a superpower? But he's a persuader.
It's a persuader.
He's a persuader, right?
And Hulk Venom.
And then Hulk Venom. So Venom actually is a Clintar. That's the name of the species. Yes, Tyler, there is a name to that species. It's called a Clintar. And Spider-Man, he call it a symbiote. A symbiote is not a word, by the way. That's something they...
Oh, really?
Symbiote, yeah, there's no such thing as a symbiote. If you put symbiote on Wikipedia, they'll come up with Venom. It's actually a comic book thing. It's a symbiosis, but there's no such thing as a symbiote.
Gotcha.
I mean, there is now.
There is now.
There is now. That's what I call it, a symbiote. But
so we're going to get into, we chose these very specifically today because we're going to discuss maybe some internal forces that are external, we think, that are basically able to mold your actions, your thoughts, everything.
How much exactly? So we're talking about the gut flora, and I think the gut flora has to be the biggest misnomer ever. Yeah. First of all, flora, you're thinking plant, and it's not that. Those are living animals. And we're going to talk about their relationship, that's why Venom, their relationship with us.
Yeah.
What us means. Us. We'll finish with something good.
Now, we actually had here in the office almost all morning today. We had, you know more of her background than I do.
She's a PhD. She has like 2 masters. She started with actually sports performance, right? Then she went into neuropsychology and neuropsychiatry. And then she's basically, so she had the sports performance, but then went into the field of neurology. Neuropsychiatry, neuropsychology, all the nervous system, all the neurological sides, so neuroscience, nervous system, all that stuff, basically. And she has like 2 or 3 masters and a PhD in whatever it is. And she's the head for not the masters, what's below masters? She said it, I forget.
It was bachelor's.
Bachelor's at they have some kind of a university here, which basically it's applied science.
Gotcha.
So not like the pharmaceutical as applied, and she's the head of the bachelor degrees for the University of, I'm going to butcher it, Legmeren. I can't say it. Like all my Dutch guys are going to be, that's not how you say it.
It was very Dutch.
It was very Dutch sounding, and he starts with an L, and he finishes with an N. There you go.
Nailed it.
I can spell it, I just can't say it. And so she's the head of the bachelor program there.
Gotcha.
She's part of that, so she's a teacher at university. So she's a pure academics, and then she heard the talks about the podcast on nutrition we did, and she was very interested because she wants to link nutrition and nervous system in an applied way.
Yeah.
And so she came to talk to us, and that turned into a 2-hour conversation with all the shit people can see here. Where it was very interesting because I could put her into the technical stuff very, very fast, which obviously she understands. But
it was really tempting when you were done talking to her. After a while, I was like, I need to pull Julien aside, and I need to say, don't fucking get used to talking to people like that. You cannot move that fast. You know what I mean? Because she picked up on everything. You were going from thing to thing. She had such a good context for everything and background.
And then she kept referring back to the right stuff.
Yeah.
She was like, but that's negative. I was like, that's very good.
And I'm like, I swear to God, Julien, if you run out that fast in a seminar, everyone's just going to leave. But it was great. It was great. Richard and I sat here for 2 hours and just listened to you two talk.
It was great because every time I referred to something like, but that's negative. I was like, all right, you're actually listening. Yeah. Oh, that was fun. Because she's a pure, by the way, she does CrossFit. She played tennis for the longest time.
Yeah.
And then she moved to CrossFit. So she knows a little bit about training, on scale. But she's a pure academics. So it was very interesting for me to take her from a pure academic talk and link everything together. That's why she was like, ooh, that's interesting. So that was a completely different conversation for me that I usually have. That was cool.
Yeah. It was interesting too, really coming from a very academic and scientific background.
Yeah, see how they look at things, it's so different.
And it's also to not be challenging with it either. She didn't bring up she wasn't like trying to butt heads. It was like, what are you doing with all this? Because I want to know what I can do with it. Yep. And that's, I think, the beauty of a program like Applied Sciences.
Versus theoretical. Yeah. Theoretical, we've been going out for studies and this and minutiae.
Yeah.
That at the end don't matter because, I mean, like we still, no matter how you go into the minutiae of studies or stuff like that, It's not applicable to any situation. You're talking about, this versus that. So her approach was more like, but how do we make it work with people? And I found very interesting that she understood right away that there is no proper study of nutrition ever done, because none of them have integrated the nervous system into them.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but if you cannot integrate the nervous system within the study of nutrition, you're missing the point. So we have not studied nutrition yet.
Yeah.
Not properly.
Yeah. And so much of this now, we did all of that kind of in the context of the nervous system first.
Yeah.
And then, but with that, some of the pushes and pulls.
I have to go to the Gut Flora.
And
By the way,
that
just to finish on her, like she offered to have a 90 people group of her students at the university going through the protocol, and that the university would be doing the testing, all the testing from how they feel to sleep to cravings to all the changes basically in an academic setting, which I'm very interested in, because then all the critics will have some studies and numbers to go at it, and if they all want to go masturbate in front of an egg looking at a study after that, they can all do it. I won't be responsible for it. I mean, yeah.
So before we take the dive into the Gut Flora.
Yep.
I gotta check something.
Making sure. There you go. But that was.
So I'm back. You may remember last week we had a single camera.
Sorry.
My bad.
So you'll see my left profile.
Actually,
podcast number.
That one.
13
It was that angle,
15,
and it's literally the worst angle for me, you, and Richard. It was like that's the most of the time angle, which is the one we lost.
But that's By the way, have we done 15 podcasts already?
We've actually. What did we We published 15 today. This is going to be 18.
Wow, that went fast.
Yeah,
that's great.
I remember when we started.
Already?
I remember when we started. Wow. I thought, all right,
6,
especially the first few, because we did 6 in like a couple days, or a few days, and I was like, whew, and we were still trying to figure it all out, and it was like, but then now, I remember when we started, I said, all right, let's get to 20.
Yeah.
Because I truly believed, though, if I can get like 20 to 30 hours of this content just out there, then we have a really, really, really good foundation to build on, and people will understand it. And so far that does seem to be going really well. So,
yes it is.
So this format's really good because it lets us dive into these types of subjects. Could you imagine how do people communicate these things? You can't talk at this depth on Instagram.
That's my biggest problem.
And that's what happens, right? Is you say something.
Those are the comments. By the way, when they say, I think we talked about it yesterday, because we shot one podcast today, so people understand. So I had no idea why I say when I say it or whatever, but can you give me a study? No, I can't give you one study because that's confirmation bias anyway.
Yeah.
If I give you one study about a subject, then you should be worried.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not worried, but you should be looking into whether or not it's confirmation bias. There's hundreds of studies that you have to read on one subject before you can draw a pattern. Yeah. So, but that's the problem online. Right? On Instagram, they go like, what studies did you read? I'm not going to spend an hour of my life listing on Instagram all the studies that I've read for you to go, choose one if you ever read them, or come back with Brett Contreras that says something, or Kelly Starrett that says that, or whatever. And I'm like, but I don't even know if they said it, by the way. So now, plus, I might get pissed at Brett Contreras for something he never said.
Exactly.
Because he said, you misunderstood him, you sent me stuff that he never said, and then now I'm pissed at the guy when he never said it, and now trash talking starts, and before you know it, we have a war started over a completely...
Over ground that neither of us were on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know, it's that part is very interesting to me, is being able to get further, is the only way this information can actually be handled by a normal person, I think. Is a lot to process it, because 60-second videos on Instagram or a picture and a comment just doesn't work.
No, so that's why we can put, what I love with this is now we can do a 60-second on Instagram because it refers to a podcast. Exactly. And the people that are on Instagram usually have seen the podcast, so they know what I'm talking about. Yeah. That's why when we post those two, teach tension, not position.
Yeah.
99.99% of people that commented on knew what we were talking about. And then there's that one asshole who goes that's a clickbait. Because you don't know where we come from. But to most people, because they've seen the podcast, they understand. So that makes me very happy. Yeah. And I had a seminar in France that I have to do in French, so it's very, very taxing to me. And the last time that I did in France, I was not happy by the response at all. This one, we had 16, 17 people. It was one of the best seminars, not in France, overall, that I did, because they all knew about StrongFit enough to have informed questions because of the podcast that we did and the fact that Victoria translated it in French. So that actually has helped a lot.
And we've got it now. We've been having it translated in French, some Hungarian, working on German.
And Spanish.
And Spanish, yeah. So for and for that reason, right? Like let's just get this out in its full form. It is funny. I always want to like troll the people who are doing the translations just to make them type something about themselves that they don't want, but we won't.
Yeah, Victoria, you're gonna have to translate that in French. Exactly.
But so the reason we do this is so we can give broad information and take a bit of a deeper dive. So let's talk the bigger, larger numbers when we think about the gut flora.
Right.
Like so what is it and of what magnitude?
And why is it important, right? Yeah. So first of all, let's talk about the problems, why we just started, right? So we discovered that there was bacteria in the human body. I mean, it was really tested, I don't know, like mid-19th century, where I started to take tab right here, realized how much bacteria there was in saliva, and then everywhere in the body, on the skin, but also inside. Then we started to discover that. The problem is 80% of the bacteria that live inside of us don't survive, especially in the gut, don't survive in a petri dish. So that means that they cannot be studied in a petri dish. That means they cannot be bred, whatever you call that, bred or cultivated in a petri dish. So we could not study them. So we didn't know where they were there, right? Up until 20 years ago when we start to do DNA sequencing.
Plus, what's interesting too is because it doesn't survive in a petri dish, even if it were to, that's not where it is normally. That's not the environment. Like that would be like studying your breathing patterns and I put you on the fucking moon to do it.
Exactly, but at least we know breathing pattern exists, right?
Yes.
With the gut flora, that means we have no clue. We thought there were bacteria, like we see E. coli, E. coli is actually a bacteria. Mm-hmm. It's inside already and stuff like that because we see it on dead people or stuff like that. Yeah. So most of the gut flora, we had no clue, right? And then 20 years ago with DNA sequencing, because the progress of all that stuff that starts to go, we started to basically do the DNA sequencing of stool. Mm-hmm. And in there, because there's a lot of the stuff, the bacteria that gets ejected through processing feces, and then it gets reconstituted and everything. And so now we started studying it. And in the last 20 years, the thing is, that industry is exploding, that field, so in our industry, it is as well. Anyway, that field is exploding because we started to draw patterns between the gut flora and behavior and all that sheds a light on the thing that is, to me, it's mind-boggling, the relationships that are starting to form. We're gonna have to rethink a lot of things. But I'm not talking like about us. It's like I'm talking about human, about culture, about religion, about society, about what makes humans humans, what we think makes humans humans. Philosophy is going to have to change. Like René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. This has to change. And the gut flora is showing that, like, it's complicating things so much. So that's the problem, is we didn't know it exists. Now that we start to know that it exists, we're going to explain a bit more. You have to understand that a lot of it is still unknown.
Yeah. And for even for broad strokes, like we're talking full effects on things like, and we'll get into details shortly here, but like your specific food cravings, your mood,
depression, disorders, neurological disorders,
your hormones, hormone profile,
where are they created?
Like
where do they start? Which nervous system is responsible for it? We all think like all hormones are created in the brain. That's not true. What about neurotransmitters? No, they're not created in the brain either. Not all of them. And then it goes on and on. So people understand the gut flora is bacteria, microbes, and viruses. We don't even know what the viruses are doing. They are there. They're sitting there doing stuff. We have no idea why. A lot of the diseases actually have a purpose. There's a book written by Ismail Shalom. I can't remember the guy's name. No, it's a name like that. Well, that explains basically the purpose of diseases. That they're not, there's a purpose to it. You don't get sick. It's more complex than that. There's a reason. Like the sickness in itself, we have a tendency to think about things that happen in the body in terms of negative and positive. Like depression is negative and sickness is negative, but actually there's no such thing as good or bad in nature. There's only function.
Yeah, it's all a process.
Yeah, it's all a process. So those diseases are a process as well. The better we understand that, the better we can control them, obviously, right? So gut flora is various viruses, bacteria, and microbes. Out of the bacteria, that's what's going to interest us for today, is there's 1,000 different types of bacteria in your stomach. The number total represents about 100 trillion, I think. If you were to add all the bacteria into one big mass, you would get something between 2 to 6 pounds.
Of just bacteria.
Just bacteria. So it's the size of an organ. So you know that your brain on average is 2.6 pounds, about a kilo-ish.
Yeah.
Kilo and a half, 1.2 kilos, right? All the bacteria together are heavier than that. So they could make an organ out of their own, right? And so they're located basically is what is called the, what is called? There's a nervous system, there's a different kind of nervous system. You have the central nervous system, which is the spine and the brain. You have, after that, you have the nervous system that composes everything else. So that's where autonomous and somatic live. Parasympathetic and sympathetic are the autonomous nervous system. Autonomic, whatever, depending on the country.
Yeah, I think it's autonomic, but I think it's also sometimes people say
autonomous.
But I don't think autonomous is the word for the nervous system.
Okay, so autonomic.
Or I'm
nervous
literally
system.
the opposite and ignore everything I said.
Anyway, autonomic nervous system, and then you have the somatic nervous system. Well, that wouldn't make sense because they always finish with a nick anyway. Yeah. So you have the autonomic and somatic nervous system and all this, and then you have the nervous system that controls the gut, basically, which is it's called intrinsic nervous system, or what's the other term? There's two terms. There's intrinsic, and then there's the other one, enteric. Enteric nervous system, right? Goes from intestine all the way to the anus, right? Yeah. And that one has more neurons than the spinal cord, right?
That's the one also that is Is that where that's the dopamine, serotonin? Is that's all?
So that's part of that. So in the enteric nervous system is where all the gut flora lives, right? Because that's the entire gut. Yeah. And it's responsible for producing 95% of the serotonin in the body, which is a neurotransmitter, and 50% of dopamine, right? Which we know is major to about a lot of stuff. Learning, moods, all that stuff is dopamine based. Half of that is produced in the gut, and 95% of the serotonin. Serotonin lives mostly in the gut, part of the enteric nervous system. So it's a major one. The enteric nervous system communicates with the other part of the nervous system through the vagus nerve. We know how important that is, right? So it's called, enteric nervous system is called the second brain because of everything that is responsible for. But this is second brain, but you also have to understand that the nervous system based on serotonin as a neurotransmitter is not a human thing. It's an animal thing. Lobsters have a serotonin, birds have a serotonin, like most animals have a serotonin-based nervous system. So it's not a human thing, it's a nature thing. Yeah. Nature's price is a nervous system, right? This is, nervous system you have to understand is a learning system that we have. We learn through the nervous system. It's far more complex than just something that allows you to see what's outside. Yeah. It's more than a feedback loop. It's also a nervous system. You see that in artificial intelligence.
It's kind of like the center of, it's also like the center of all your inputs for you, but also for evolution's sake.
Exactly.
You know, that's where any adaptation has to come from that.
It comes from that. Yeah. And so it's artificial intelligence. We're starting to understand, like you can see that they stop trying to get to consciousness through artificial intelligence. So they're not trying to create Skynet. They don't want something that will go, I live. They want a learning mechanism that gets better. And so it seems that actually consciousness is you get to consciousness through learning correctly, which is a very interesting idea, right? There is no human consciousness. There's just a learning process that gets better and better and better to the point where you learn so well that that's what consciousness is.
One day the thing that you learn is that you are.
It seems. You know? It seems. So artificial intelligence is a wonderful way to check what we know about the nervous system. Because whatever we know, they're trying to make it into a machine-based. So they're really duplicating nature. What nature's not one price, which is nervous system, they're trying to duplicate that into a machine. So instead of panicking about Skynet, see that if we can build a machine, that means we understand it, I mean, we can learn better. Yeah. And we'll achieve a greater consciousness in that sense, right? And so that's why Carl Friston, the neuroscientist, is mostly influencing the field of artificial intelligence right now, because they understand that it's not about consciousness, it's about learning. And learning is the nervous system. And so that's a tremendous important part to know, because then you'll see that the human nervous system is not one thing, like we think, like parasympathetic, sympathetic. That's just the autonomic nervous system, the stuff you cannot control per se, right? That makes you react to things. Somatic is what you control, but then after that you have the central, which is spinal cord and brain, and then you have the enteric, which is all your gut. And your gut seems to do way more than we think. The Greeks talked about it, all the Asian culture talked about it, but it seems to go far more than gut instinct seems to have a scientific base that is far more important than we understood. So the Greeks talked about it, about the importance of the stomach. Plato famously described, the Senate and stuff like that. And it's actually far more based into evolutionary biology than we thought.
Yeah.
And the reason, again, we're starting there is because it's only 20 years old. Literally, we've been studying the shit for 20 years, that's all. So we knew he was there. We didn't know.
I was still in high school when they started studying this.
I just got to the States when I started turning,
Yeah.
And imagine, the first few guys were like, what is this?
Yeah.
And so now we started to decompose it. And then so we have that 100 trillion of them in our stomach. You have to understand, they're not, this is more like it, like the Thing from John Carpenter's movie. Each of those 100 trillion is a living thing.
Yeah.
So
with its own DNA, its own, literally its own survival process, its own everything.
It's a living creature. We have 100 trillion little aliens in our stomach doing their own thing separately. And then they work together as colonies, right? So some of them belong to a certain family, and then they work together. So it's there's a bunch of tribes of little aliens in your stomach, and each is more or less responsible for specific things. And then there's 1,000 different tribes.
Yeah, and we've got into some of the specifics on digestion and things like that, which of course, when we talk about things in the gut, we think that digestion is just what it's for. I was aware, even growing up, that there was bacteria in your gut and that they knew of that. And I thought it was either a byproduct of digestion or it was part of the mechanism to drive digestion,
so we thought,
decomposition. But they're finding quite rapidly and pretty decisively now the effect on everything from hormones to the state of your nervous system to food cravings. So we
misunderstood the relationship.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was a factory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that basically you send there and then they decompose the food for you. So a
I thought it was
symbiotic relationship.
a place for a chemical reaction.
Like a bunch of little soldiers that do stuff for you.
Yeah.
Right? And so a symbiotic relationship, but there was a passive aspect to the gut flora. Right? That's what I thought. Like it was a bunch of robots and then they do what you ask. And it turns out that it's not like that. First of all, you have to understand that the genome, so the DNA composition of those bacteria, are 100 times more complex than ours. So their DNA is 100 times more complex than the human body's DNA, first of all. So, all right. You have to understand that for each gene of the human body, there's on average 360 genes of bacteria. So that means that all the genes that we have total accumulated in the entire body, less than 1% of that is human, is of human origin.
Yeah, less than.
By human, I mean monkey
less
origin.
than 1/3 of 1%.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Is the monkey. Like so, because that's what we think we are. We think we are the monkey, Darwin evolution and everything, and the brain being an extension of the nervous system and everything. So first of all, your nervous system that you have is not human. It's been there for at least over 300 million years old, if not more. We think the nervous system has been around for 500,000.
Now we've talked about the nervous system a few times as far as how it is built layer upon layer upon layer, right? Is there any sort of, what is the newest layer, the most human of layers of the nervous system then? Like what is the part of the nervous system that is the newest?
The ventral vagus nerve.
Okay.
The key is if you look at evolution, you started as bacteria, all of us, right? Unicellular life into multicellular life. So life has been around for 3.8 billion years on years on Earth. So let's say 4 billion years, right? The first 3.2 billion years were unicellular. Then it got into multicellular, so more than one cell. So it took basically 3.2 billion years to get to one cell to two cells. It took 700 or 6 to 700 million years to go from 2 cells to us. That's a fast one, comparatively speaking. The problem was to go from 1 to 2, to get them to work together. Out of those 600 million years to get from 2 cells to us, 500 million years of those had a nervous system. So you can see how important it is for a process, for the learning behavior to have the nervous system. All creatures have nervous system. They don't all have a brain, but they all have a nervous system. So it's extremely important. So the newest one that we saw, because you start as a bacteria, and then you have the reptilian state where basically it's loners animals that just meet together to mate, and then after they go back to finally the mammals, which is building a tribe, living in tribes, because then you get more organized, you survive longer, everything becomes better, right? And that's basically the tribe stuff. That's what the polyvagal theory talks about, is the ventral vagus nerve for us, for example, being able to communicate socialization, to communicate friendliness on your face, so it's control of the expression of the face, to indicate something, it's all that stuff. That's part of the mammal's ventral vagus nerve part. That's the most evolved part of the nervous system that we have, and it relates a lot to parasympathetic and sympathetic, for example.
Yeah.
The ventral vagus nerve has control over many things.
Yeah. And the socialization aspect, anything involving human interaction, all that stuff, that is going to be very much influenced by this.
Yeah, exactly. So the central nervous system is the spine and the brain that connects to the vagus nerve. But the vagus nerve goes from there and start to go everywhere. So they go into, why am I drawing a blank? You have the central nervous system, and the other one where the somatic and autonomic are, and then the vagus nerve goes through all that. And then the vagus nerve connects to the enteric nervous system where the gut flora is, and all that stuff is, and all the neurons that compose the enteric nervous system,
and
all that
dopamine,
stuff.
serotonin.
Everything is produced there, then it starts to spread everywhere in the body. So less than 5% actually go to the brain for the serotonin. It's only 5% of the serotonin. Most of it is stomach and the rest of the body.
Yeah.
So that's very important actually. But so the enteric nervous system was considered just part of digestion because that's all the gut was doing.
Yeah.
And then we started to study the DNA sequencing of those bacteria, and then we started to find some stuff that are absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Right? And then so we can go into that. So for example, they started to divide it into 3 main enterotypes, like the 3 types of bacteria that are really taking over versus the other ones. Like they're different colonies, 1,000 different colonies, but some are major, others are very small, just like a country, if you want, with a bunch of warlords that can either work together or against each other.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that, right? And with some small kingdoms and some big ones. And so it seems the 3 big kingdoms. The first one is the bacteroids, right? And they draw their energy. They're responsible for digesting the protein, saturated fats, and BCAAs. Then you got the Prevotella, right? That's another kingdom that is responsible for starch and sugar. And then you got Ruminococcus that gets its energy from the shell of certain gelatinous protein. Okay, whatever. It goes into that kind of stuff. But those are the 3 main ones, right? And so I started to read about all this because I'm starting to see some patterns, and I find it very interesting because right away parasympathetic and protein jumped at me. So that means, then there would have to be a relationship between bacteroids and protein, and therefore the parasympathetic. I was like, oh, that's maybe I'm just going on a hunch right there. But it seems to me that if bacteroids are responsible for protein saturated fats, I know that the parasympathetic nervous system on the autonomic side is relating to the digestion of protein because it takes more energy to digest. It's like therefore there should be an interaction between the bacteroids and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I start to read, and then you discover some fascinating stuff. They had some mice that were raised in a sterile environment without any gut flora whatsoever. And those mice are always asocial, which in itself is very interesting because that without the gut flora, those mice cannot live in a tribe.
Yeah.
Right, but the goal of evolution is...
That's it. That's the most recent development.
Exactly. That's the goal of evolution, is to take us toward more socialization, not less.
More order.
The more evolved... more order. That's the Schrödinger idea of finality, right? Yeah. The more evolved a society, the more socialization there is. Look at Japan, very regulated in their codes. Why? Because so many people on one island. So you have to socialize more, you have more codes, more order is being created. A lot of rules. Yeah. So which is not always the same thing as a lot of order, unfortunately. But that's where the human society fucks it up. Yes, that's where the intention is, and then we fuck it up. But so you could tell all that stuff between socialization and all this. And so here comes the bacteroids, and you see the relationship between the parasympathetic and the protein and all this. So we have those mice that are asocial in nature, right? Because they don't have any gut flora, sterile environment, and they're completely asocial. So what they did is they basically injected what's called a fecal transplant. Doesn't mean shit. It just means the bacteria from one to the next. Since we can't create them, we had to go get it in the stool and then transfer them into those mice, and those mice became social. naturally their behavior went from asocial to social, but just by introducing bacteroids.
That's crazy.
Which I found completely crazy. No, then wait, there's more.
Yeah.
Remember Dangerfield? Wait,
Yes.
there's more. So they took what is called ASD, which is autism syndrome disorder, which is not autism, it's the dysfunction of it, the dysfunctional
The
part,
extreme.
the extreme and the dysfunctional extreme of autism.
Yeah.
I'm an extreme, but I'm not the dysfunctional one.
Yeah.
So this dysfunctional part is a lot of, this like repetitive movement. That's what this is.
Yeah.
It's repetition of movement and, for example, asocial behavior. And they gave the mice that had ASD, same thing, bacteroids, and then they saw diminishing of the symptoms because the socialization took place out of getting bacteroids. So now that means that you have bacteroids on one side, right? That links to the parasympathetic on the other side, which is linked to socialization. That's a polyvagal theory. That is linked to digesting red meat, which we know is the hardest thing to digest. That requires to be in the parasympathetic side on the autonomic side.
Yeah.
So you start to see that.
So for the bacteria to do what it wants to do, it has to kind of make you get to this state.
Yeah. So in order
like
to
that's its goal. It's like, I need you here so I can do this thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's basically seems to be some kind of it's not even a feedback loop. It's some kind of a carnival, ride thing where you go from socialization that is required to digest, that goes to the vagus nerve that is required to socialize. So it seems there's a gut flora to digestion to socialization that takes you to the gut flora, that takes you back to digestion, that you need to socialize, but you need to socialize to digest, and you need the bacteroids to socialize, but you need the parasympathetic to do that, and you need the bacteroids for the parasympathetic, but you need... So there's that basically those things that fit together as one behavior. And in the center of it is that fucking thing, that fucking bacteria.
What's interesting too is I remember reading that like the enteric nervous system, two things. One is able to fully function with the vagus nerve essentially
always
severed.
Out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it'll actually function on its own without any real connection, right? And it will still do everything that needs to do. The other interesting thing that I remember with this was there is such a I don't even remember how to put this. Like, it's really hard to diminish the influence that it can have on your like mechanical, like physical processes in your body. I think there was a thing with mice where they had taken one mouse that had kind of basically a kind of a corrupted gut flora, if you will, imbalance off, and they gave it to the other one, to one that was either healthy or had none. And what happened was they changed nothing in the environment or for the food for the mouse that was healthy and then got the weird bacteria. But that mouse all of a sudden started to grow basically adipose tissue around its organs too.
Okay, so
it started to get like their organs started to get fatter. So it wasn't just like
it got even better than that.
Yeah.
They took twins, human twins, right? One fat, obese, one lean, right? Problem. They took the gut flora of both, gave it to two different mice. The one that got the obese gut flora got obese. The one that got lean got leaner.
It's crazy.
Yeah, human ones, not mice. Human ones. He works on that.
Yeah.
I know it was the most fucking crazy. Even better. Took two mice, one aggressive, one scared. Took the gut flora, switched it. Right?
Behavior switch.
One became the one I was aggressive became scared. The one I was scared became aggressive.
Yeah.
By the way, all the stuff that I say between the bacteria and all that stuff. Look, the autonomic nervous system is called that because you don't control it. Yeah. There is no influence on the parasympathetic digestion. You can't tell yourself digest.
Yeah.
You can influence it. That's not true. But basically, they call autonomic because it's something you're not supposed to influence. So, bacteroids, you're not telling them shit. Autonomic, you're not saying shit. So all those are basically things you have no control over.
And yet.
But the gut flora does.
And yet your mood is at the whim. Your mood, happiness.
So that means
socialization. All of it.
Socialization is not a conscious act.
Basically.
It's a bacteroid act. Yeah. The bacteroid is responsible, will be the one talking to, that's what we saw in mice. No bacteroids, asocial. Put bacteroids, it becomes social. That means that maybe the absence of bacteroids will kill your social sense, life, whatever. But maybe the amount of it define exactly how social you are. Which is a goal of evolution. He wants more social. So the goal of
More
evolution is to control the bacteroids.
Yeah.
Imagine what that means. Oh, because then you have autism. By the way, autistic people have a gut flora that is different from non-autistic people. We've been tested. So does that means less bacteroids? Because autistic people are less social. Yeah, but high functioning means you just socialize with one person, which in today's society is okay. So that means that there's an entire control of the gut flora population that would basically change behavior. So remember, none of those connections are conscious in that case.
Yeah. So I have a question. We have there's a lot about, say, kind of behavior modification based upon what is going on in your gut, right? My question is, how do we affect change in that then? Meaning, do we have to change what we eat over the long term in order to foster a more balance?
All right, so that's a real question.
Or do we go on the other end of this and we take the action, and then is the gut flora going to change?
So that's a very good question. But for example, like there was the poor mice always get it. Yeah. Sorry, if you love mouse, it's not a good podcast for you.
If you ever watched that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it's actually the mice that are running everything.
Yeah, actually, it was kind of funny. You put a mouse upside down, and this thing was obviously fighting, right? Mm-hmm. We gave that mouse the gut flora of a depressed person. It stopped fighting. So you start to go, okay, so which one is which? We've seen depressed people. This actually called the Flemish Gut Flora thing, project, I think the name is.
That's going on right now, right?
That's going on right now.
Still moving.
Yeah. Oh no, it's just starting. Like they've been testing a few thousand people, but we're still going Flemish because it's Belgium and Holland, and that's the Flemish language. It's for people I don't know Europe, and so they were starting to establish certain things that are very interesting on that. So we know depressed people have a different gut flora than non-depressed people. You're missing two key types of bacteria when you're depressed. Forgot the names, but it's two specific stuff. Yeah.
Now, how does that? So if you don't have it, how do you then get it?
Exactly. So that's the problem. Is first thing they say, we're going to do a pill, where we put those two in the pill.
All of those studies end in they're trying to find a way to put a pill.
Yeah, but imagine if they are wrong about that. The shit you could create.
Plus, when
I've seen the movie. Yeah. There was Will Smith in it. It did not end well.
Plus, when they have, when they do the all of the
studying is always that.
Like so.
Alzheimer, ASD. It's always like extreme and dysfunctional extremes.
When you talk about this is all a matter of your body trying to find homeostasis somewhat. You know what I mean? It's a way to find balance in both socialization, action, survival, all of this stuff. It's just kind of trying to keep the ship afloat and moving in the right direction. Yeah. But when we have this dysfunction, you introduce a pill. You see it all the time with, like athletes who take steroids. Yep. Is what happens is you don't have low testosterone and just take testosterone. Because then that's fixed. Yeah. But your body then does lots of other things around that you have to mitigate.
Yeah, exactly. And
as well as then your natural production. So that's the concern with introducing a pill to this situation, is you can almost toxify the whole environment. And from what we're seeing, this is an extremely critical, not only to your actions and health, but actually to almost who you are. As far as what people see of you.
Probiotics? I don't know that we know what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, look, how do you even form your opinion of another person? Based upon how they're kind of acting, their mood, their communication.
Exactly. Socialization is basically what you're doing. Are they social or not? Otherwise, a good dude is an asshole.
Yeah, and if that gets fucked up because of any reason, but you dick around with that system.
Probiotics is always the same way. So when you find in yogurt, it seems to be fairly mild and safe. But imagine if we start there's three main enterotypes I'm going to explain. But if you start to fuck with those ones, who knows what you're getting into? What if it's the wrong kind for you? So what do I mean by that? So that Flemish project is basically saying we have blood types, right? It seems to be like we favor a certain type of bacteria. It seems like we're either more toward bacteroids, more toward Prevotella, or more toward Rhinococcus. They tested people from Japan to France to the US and everything, and they saw correlation in between people and instead of places or diets. So it seems that we also have some kind of an enterotype of a person that you are based on the bacteria that you have. Yeah. Right? Just like blood type, if you want. Yeah. And so there's that. But this is where the complication arises. So they say that, so that is regardless of diet, people were more toward one thing or the other. Okay, but then there's another stuff where they took kids from, it was I think Burkina Faso, which is in Africa, I believe, a country in West Africa, and they tested their gut flora and they discovered that they were 53% Prevotella. Why? Because Prevotella is responsible for carbs. And in a lot of Africa, it's less protein and more yams, what we call féculents in French, is like, yams or potatoes or stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so they have a gut flora that indicates that they have a diet that is mostly based on carbohydrates, starch, féculents, I can't remember the name in English, but like, the potatoes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then they did the test on kids that are in Europe that have far more protein and saturated fats. And then they found that the bacteroids were actually the ones that were out there far more, higher amount of bacteroids. Yeah. And in Europe, you eat more protein and more saturated fats.
Yeah. Now that sounds to me though like that is establishing kind of a baseline.
At least for kids.
Yeah, but also like that's a baseline for probably normal function, right?
It seems that your diet will change your gut flora, and there's a behavior associated with your gut flora.
Yeah, because what I would want to know is if I have way too little of one, is it because I'm just not eating enough of that? Like, you know what I mean? So like if I eat a thing and I have digestion problems because maybe things aren't balanced to accommodate that food, does that mean I should never eat that food? Or does that mean I kind of got to give it time and do more consistently?
That's the thing
because we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. And that's the key. Is it seems okay? So there's a problem. Like it seems that long-term diet changes your gut flora. All right, but because we just started, the only way we could know is you take a kid in Africa and you see his gut flora at 7, then or let's say 20. Right? Then we take that person, we put it in Europe for 20 years. With the new food and everything, and then we see if the gut flora has changed. Now, I would like to finish that test. There's a behavior of that kid in Africa. Maybe he's happy, he's 15 and he's happy, everything is set. His gut flora is set based on his environment, everything is a certain behavior. We take him to Europe, where the food is changing, right? And we see if his behavior has changed and if he's happy with the new food, and then we test the gut flora to see the differences between the two. Yeah. Then only then could you start to see the difference in behavior and stuff like that. So
it seems like an affordable study.
Eventually we'll get to that. Yeah. But you see a lot of people, for example, coming from Africa that are so depressed in European countries. I would love to know if it's a cultural thing, always a little bit, but what if it's a food thing as well? What if it doesn't mean, what if your culture, as let's say you're a Viking, basically was fish and a very specific food, but there was not that much choices.
Yeah.
Right? That much choice in your food intake from there. You certainly did not eat venison all year long or stuff like that because it was mostly fish and some hunting, but not, by the way, even when they were hunting countries, they're not that much stuff to hunt.
And almost every culture has its staples.
Mostly, right?
If you think of almost any culture, there's a couple foods that you're going to associate
white
with
or red, pork versus red meat. Like if you hunt in France.
Like in Austria.
Yeah, exactly.
You go even to the grocery, 80% of the meat that's consumed, this is totally anecdotal, but it's pork. You know what I mean? It's always.
No, okay,
whereas when I'm in the States, it's chicken and beef.
If you hunt in Europe, let's say 200 years ago, you have some deers, that's true, but you're going to get a shitload of rabbits, you're going to get a shitload of boars, so you're going to get pork or a lot of chicken small game, basically. The big game is not as often. I mean, so each culture has its own food, right? So that means that if we look at this, you have a gut flora that is built like that. So genetically speaking, that is built a certain way. So now, if you're genetically built a certain way and then you grew up in a certain country eating certain foods, that would set you on a path that I think is the way you're going to have to eat, because the problem also is now we have people travel, but also the food, the choices of food have quintupled. Like you basically have fruits in winter, you have honey in winter, you can eat kangaroo if you want to. You have basically accesses of food you never had access before, and then neither did your ancestors. So there's an entire thing there where I think food is a language, by the way. Like your enteric system talks to your nervous system through the vagus nerve, right? And asks for things to be done. How do you talk to your enteric nervous system? There's only one way, it's the food.
Yeah. Well, and I look at it this way too, is we have there's actually very few ways that we actually bring anything from the outside world into our body, right? You can smell
water or food.
a thing.
Yep. You can
But
smoke.
but even that is kind of a
No, the smell goes straight to the brain.
exactly.
It doesn't go through.
But even then, like that is kind of a component of like my understanding of the sense of smell really exists for the sake of food consumption.
Well, pretty
It's
much.
not that
Or
necessary
danger.
on its own,
Or
danger, which
Yeah.
is danger. Yeah, like we don't use our sense of smell to avoid getting killed like animals do.
Not anymore. Yeah.
And so, but it's very interesting if you think of how intimate of a relationship it really is with food. It is the only way that you chemically interact with the outside world.
But remember also like the autonomic nervous system, right? You can't control it.
Yeah.
Right, so that's how your enteric nervous system talks to you, is through the autonomic, parasympathetic, sympathetic, digestion, all that stuff, right? I mean, it talks other ways, but that way as well. You have no way of talking to it. It can talk to you, you just can't talk to it. It can talk to you through the vagus nerve by making you do shit through the dorsal part of the vagus nerve, the afferent system. And we know that the vagus nerve controls everything from socialization to love to all that stuff. So the gut flora can talk to you, but you can't talk to it.
Yeah.
The only language you have with the enteric where you can influence, where you can give orders, is through food.
Yeah. That's it.
So that's a pretty big fucking relationship,
Yeah.
right? And then you start to see how much of the gut flora, how it influences behavior.
And this is why some of those food dysfunctions,
Yes.
you know, whether it's not just eating disorder, but bad habits even, you know, eating just shitty food, over-processed food, especially if you look at preservatives in food now.
Yeah, exactly.
I always it's been interesting for me kind of moving over here as I look up, there's a few articles out there, there's a handful, probably a dozen different chemicals in foods in the States that are actually illegal in the EU, cannot be added to food.
Yes.
But all of them exist. They don't exist because maybe they do. Depends on what conspiracy podcast you listen to.
Yes, that's
I
true.
don't believe that they exist just to fuck you up. Like all of them, really, their purpose is to either make things more resilient in the ground when it's growing, and longer shelf life.
Available, to you.
But both of those things, how does something have a longer shelf life? By being less susceptible to bacteria.
Yeah.
And corrosion or in decomposition. And it's the same thing. It's bugs and parasites, you know, on a living plant. That's the other concern.
Exactly,
so all of that, if we're trying to protect the food we eat from that, and then we put that into our body,
what does it do to the bacteria?
what
inside?
happens?
Yes. Exactly.
And then what happens generationally from one to the other? And then you have all these new behavioral disorders. And
even neurological disorders, man, that are starting to appear. And then we're starting to understand that, for example, the enteric nervous system produces its own hormones.
Yeah.
Not just dopamine, like it produces a bunch of hormones. There's a lot of neurons in there. It's his own endocrine system. So that means that he has control over things in you that you don't understand. And so how do we kill gut flora, by the way? You have antibiotics, right? So if you, in the meat, that's the carbs in the States, right? To make them bigger and everything. So that you have antibiotics you take, maybe that your mom was taking when you were pregnant. So over prescription of antibiotics in the States can lead to a number of problems, right? By the way, you have undigested food, protein, namely.
Overeating.
So if you have protein that you can't digest well because you have carbs at the same time, it will sit in the colon. In the colon, it starts to putrefy, and then that basically in turn can start to kill the good gut bacteria in your stomach, because it's good and bad in that sense, right? There's harmful
At least
versus
for that purpose,
there's harmful versus and so you have a number of ways to kill the gut flora, but you have to understand, once you've killed the gut flora, for example, if you happen to kill those two very specific types of bacteria that you have in your gut flora, there's a link between that and depression. I'm not saying that this will cause depression, but there's obviously a link, because when you're depressed, you're lacking the two part of the gut flora. So now people will say, yeah, but it's maybe the depression that kills the gut flora. And I'm like, all right, what if it's the other way around?
Yeah. Well, I want to take the next big leap. This is my favorite part.
Yes.
This is my favorite part.
Let's
talk venom.
Let's talk venom.
Now, I want to talk about just what, this is it's so tough even to segue into this part.
There's no segue, let's just go at it.
So what is making me think?
Yes.
What is that? Because I think most everybody, they think me, my thoughts, all of my motives, all of it, it's in my head. And you know what my theory on that is?
No.
All of your senses except for one is above your shoulders.
Yes.
Primarily. So you're like, I see with my fucking head, I hear with my head, I smell and taste with my head.
Yep.
like
You feel with other things.
you feel with other things.
There's other parts.
There's a little more of me than
There's a
just my
little
head.
more,
But all of most of my interactions with the world are through this interface.
And then there is the Christian view of the soul is in the head. The further away from the ground, the closer to the sky, that's where your soul is, right? The third eye spirituality is here for the Eastern stuff. So it's always away from basically from the ground. And there is that famous sentence from René Descartes that says, I think, therefore I am. That the seat of consciousness, what makes you a human, is your rational thoughts. Yeah. And that to me is an extremely dangerous thing. And
your existence, like none of that really relies on the fact that you
plus, by the way,
on your thought.
Evolutionary biology, that seat of your rational thoughts is 100,000 years old. We know, because in neuroscience, right? It's 100,000 years old. So your nervous system has been around for 500 million years, basically more or less in the form that we're using it right now, whereas the seat for your rational thoughts is 100,000 years old. All right. So if you start to accumulate all the stuff, so we understand now, especially through that basically there is a feedback loop between the monkey and the bacteria, right? Like we are not just a monkey that happens to have a factory in the stomach that helps us digest. No. It's a bunch of little aliens that talk to us on a regular basis, and everything is a feedback loop between the bacteria and the monkey. And at some point, I started asking myself the simple questions: is we are assuming we're the monkey, but what if with your bacteria? What if we are venom?
And by we, you mean like what is the thing that because here's the deal: when we think in
behavior terms.
Well, also words. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like when I'm going out and just logically thinking my way through a day, that is mostly talk in my head. But there's a huge difference between thinking with words and feeling. And it's the same thing with movement. When I want you, I don't tell you to think about your bicep when you do curls. I want you to feel it.
Yeah.
And that's a different thing.
How much of a human behavior is based on feeling, and how much of it is your thoughts? What is inherently the most human thing to do? Art.
Yeah.
Right? Is art based on rational words, or is art based on feeling?
All feel.
So it's all behavior based.
It's this perfect.
Is human behavior based? Look at love. It's not based on rational decisions, that's for sure, right? Yeah. It's based on how you feel. How many of what you would call a pure human behavior based on rational words, and how many of them are based on feel? And behavior seems to be mostly controlled through the gut flora. Like, let's look at depression. Right? The depression is the source of existentialism, where you go like, who am I? When am I doing that? Yeah. Okay. That's where you really ask yourself who you are. That's where you reset the predictions, the Carl Friston model, trying to decide where you want to go in life. All right. Depression is a human expression, right? Pondering about what your life is inherently very human, right? That doesn't belong in words. That belongs basically in a behavior, in a feeling. Yeah? And we know that depression in someone is linked to the gut flora. We don't know which one causes which or what the relationship is, but there is a direct link between your gut flora and the depression. And remember, how does the enteric nervous system talks to the rest of the nervous system? Through the vagus nerve. But it's basically the vagus nerve is the dorsal part of the vagus nerve that goes from the enteric to the brain. That's the dorsal side of the vagus nerve, which is where the polyvagal theory tells us depression lives. So maybe depression doesn't live
not in the vagus nerve.
In the vagus nerve, it's being transported by the vagus nerve. But depression comes from who you are as a human, which is the bacteria. So, and it's a question. It's not. I'm not saying necessarily, because I know religious people will come at me on that one. But what if we're not?
What they taught me in Catholic school.
No, I don't think so. What if we are not the monkey? What if we're the bacteria? Yeah. Like we assume that the seat of consciousness is the brain. Okay, but which one?
Well, the other thing that's interesting.
Which brain? What if it's not that brain?
Well, when they talk about that, is the enteric nervous system being the second brain.
What if it's the first?
It's like,
brain?
well, look at all of the functions that it controls, and which of those would you prioritize?
By the way,
all of those
you can transplant the enteric nervous system to another human.
Yeah.
You can't do that with anything else. You can't do it with the brain, but you can the enteric. You can. And what I would like to do is you transplant, and then you see the behavior change.
Now, we're not saying that human's consciousness is in the other person, but the behaviors may start to.
All right, but what is consciousness?
But here's what's interesting: is on the subject of consciousness and who we are. What I think is really interesting is it's almost like we are less the monkey and not so much the bacteria, but almost like what we are is actually the state of the relationship between the two.
At least that, if we are not the bacteria. I like to think of it in a simple way.
I don't mean that we are the monkey and the bacteria.
Yeah.
I mean we are
the relationship
that
between
interaction
the two. I like
is what's fueling.
Because I like comic books and science fiction movies.
Yeah.
So the way I'm picturing it right now is bacteria are a bunch of little aliens that colonized Earth a long time ago, got into the monkeys, and we forgot.
Yeah.
And we woke up one day going like, hey, with the monkeys. No, man, we were always the aliens. We forgot. So it, from John Carpenter, no, it's us. Like the thing, no, it's us.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's where I like, at night, that's where I like having fun. But going back to what consciousness is, what if artificial intelligence shows us that consciousness is learning process going so well at some point you reach there? That means you transport the enteric nervous system, which is a seat of learning, because it's a seat of consciousness in a way, into a new body. You would have to relearn different feedback loop up to resetting a new learning process that would lead to a new consciousness.
It's crazy.
If you look at artificial intelligence, that's where it's pointing. So what if basically consciousness is the learning process being done from the bacteria and the monkey?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, even though I relate to myself from 10 years ago as that I have been having that experience the whole time, right? It's not fucking me.
It's not true, by the way. Because
I
remember when
mean?
you were 20, when I was 19,
That guy's a fucking moron.
I would slap the shit out of me.
Yeah, like I think that growth, it does change literally who you are.
Yeah, because we say, well,
that learning
I'm the same
process
person. No,
changes
you're
who you
not. Behavior-wise, you know so much more.
Yeah.
Like, do you think I am me the same way now, 20 years ago? If we could actually go back, I think even if you could just jump back in your body, because your hormonal, everything is different.
Yeah.
Your learning system is different.
Yeah.
Well, are you the same person? I really don't believe so. I believe if I could jump in my body back 20 years, I would literally slap myself going into, dude, you're going to have to fucking grow up.
Yeah.
Grow up means going further down the learning process, but surely, like as in artificial intelligence, learning process, the alpha zero process of who you are.
Yeah. Well, and during that process is where you start to establish actually like your values and a lot of some of these foundational things that make you who you are now. Yeah. But that's based solely upon the experience of this last amount of time.
Exactly. So we're going back to
you're the result of that learning experience.
Yeah, like prediction versus expression, right? Yeah. And so to me, that's what we are. We are the learning process. That's what consciousness is. It's an extremely advanced learning system. It's alpha zero time a trillion because it's the nervous system. And
it's not just chess.
It's not just chess. No, it goes past that.
Yeah.
It's all a play between the gut flora, so between the bacteria and the monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no matter what, we're not just a monkey. That's established.
Certainly.
No.
Yeah.
I think therefore I am. To me, is one of the most destructive things that was ever said. Not the intent behind it. Don't get me wrong. But at the end, that idea that we are the monkey. Oh no. And that's what you see a lot that bothers me also even in the fitness world. It's like just eat protein, just do 5 sets, just do this. It's like, but we're not just a monkey. Like the nervous system is the key to all this. You have to understand the nervous system. And so there are 3 different ones. There's the spine and then you have the vagus nerve and all the outside nerves. And then you have the gut flora. And all 3 establish a prediction expression Carl Friston model. But we have to understand it's all 3. You don't get to think it's just the brain and the spine, which is what most people envision.
And that it's not all 3 separately. As a matter of fact, I was just reading a deal a little bit ago about how it's very easy for us in modern society to view the body as a collection of parts. Yeah. Because like now we have the ability to replace parts, spare parts.
And because we have cars now. And we think in terms of computers and cars, machines, basically. That's what the industrial revolution did.
The body as a machine, that's not the way it is.
That's the industrial revolution that did that to us.
Yeah.
Because we started to go in factories and we start to see the world as a factory, with a bunch of parts that you can replace at any time. We are that now. We live in a factory, in a society that can replace us at any time. Yeah. You work at Google, whatever, I'll fire you and get another coder. Yeah. So he started to make us believe that we are made of parts as well, and we are not. It's an interaction. Yeah. By the way, not even Carl Friston, but like Alpha Zero and everything, they call that the neural networks for a reason. It's like we see that the best way to learn is actually a bunch of guys getting together from different information, what they call communal intelligence. Mm-hmm. That seems to be how learning is done. And talk about communal intelligence. If the gut flora is not the first example of communal intelligence, I don't know what is.
right?
It's 100 trillion different living creatures, all of them doing his own thing, working together.
And also not just created out of thin air,
Yep.
as in our literally our cultivated descendants of the very beginning.
Yeah, and so
Right.
and
So literally, you do have something that is there that has been refined via that
by the way,
learning process
talking
for
about
millions and
the
millions of
which
years.
is very interesting is that you're born without the gut flora. Like you are basically, as long as you're on your mother's milk, you don't have a gut flora. So it starts to get developed around a year and a half. Once you're weaned, the gut flora starts to develop, and it's that relationship between the two that seems to make us jump forward as humans. If you look at monkeys up to 2-3 years old, they're well on advanced compared to us, stronger, and then we start to kick up on the consciousness level, and things starts to go. We learn faster than monkeys. That's why we're better.
Yeah.
Because we learn faster, but we don't have a gut flora till about 18 months old. Because that's also stuff when it came to the nutrition, where people like, well, look at babies. When they're being breastfed, they have milk, sugar, fats, protein, all at the same time, right? So therefore, it shows you that humans can have mixed meals. I was like, first of all, they sleep all day, their nervous system is not formed, and second of all, they don't have the gut flora. Yeah. So that means their behavior is not affected by those meals yet. We don't even know that because their nervous system is not formed, and who knows if they have a consciousness the way we defined it.
Yeah.
Even the way we define it, right? And then the gut flora
As
enters,
though we define it in this very well
still like we have, like we know what it is, right? But then you have a year and a half in, and then basically the learning process really starts. Obviously, the gut flora is part of behavior that we've proved, but I'm pretty sure it's part of the learning process as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool too because, like you said, where a baby doesn't have a gut flora until they get off of mother's milk,
Yep.
and then start consuming food from the earth.
From
And-
its own environment, yes.
Yeah, but I also think that it's kind of neat that if you do take, kind of adopt the approach that you are this combination of all of these things, what's really cool is all of that bacteria, everything that we're talking about is something that you are consuming from the earth. That is a connection to
the earth.
To the earth.
To your environment.
Yeah.
It's
Which is
probably your
important. It's why
first
people
true, yes.
Yeah. It's why people feel, there's a reason that you can go outside and outside looks and feels
Home.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Feels like home. It feels, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
There's
Because
something
that's your
there to
connection.
it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so if you look from an evolutionary perspective, it would make sense that we would need a connection to the earth, to our environment. And our first true connection to the environment, outside of visual, is the gut flora. Because that's the one that's going to truly change who you are. The proof is there. So maybe that's where the behavior change comes from, is so that you are given a taste of your environment, gut flora, and then that will decide your behavior based on the environment.
Yeah, and to take one step further, it's very interesting. We're talking like it's the bacteria that's talking to you, right?
At least.
But what's interesting is what is the bacteria's purpose? What is
Yeah.
it saying from?
Yeah.
But we are just eating it from foods that are growing from these natural processes. It's very
And then,
interesting. It's a very natural way to. We then can have a symbiotic relationship with
Yeah.
the earth. It's
With
in
the earth,
you.
yes,
It's
exactly.
and that's
Yep.
and all of that seems to make sense in a way that I hope is not like fucking weird and religiously confrontational. Though I cannot wait to see the
You'll
comments.
get there. You'll get there. It has to go there because
It's
just
not
by
going to
saying
be.
we're not
is
the
it-
monkey.
Now, next episode we're going to go with the whole "the Earth is flat" thing, and so I hope.
I was going to go against Christian, Jesus Christ, and Moses, but okay, we can start with the earth is
we'll,
flat.
we'll flat Earth, and then we'll do religion.
Yeah,
and then
let's
we'll-
do that. Like, I want to go at Moses, and
I want to go at Moses.
yeah, full blast. But yeah, so like the whole learning process is what interests me the most.
Yeah.
So, but imagine. So, by the way, if food is a language, connection to the earth, imagine how important the digestion stuff becomes.
Yeah.
Like our nutrition protocol, maybe that's why we've seen such mental clarity. Because we have at what 95% plus success rate right now,
Yeah.
and it's sleep, it's cravings, and it's mental clarity. And so I think over the next, because we're studying that for 20 years, let's give it another 50. I probably won't see it.
Yeah.
But I bet you will go toward what they'll call tribal diets or stuff like that, like food based on
Regional and
regional,
Yeah.
like local farmers based on your genetic profile. Are you more toward you're more toward German? To me, it was Irish and Hungarian, stuff like that. Based on that, and then your environment as you grew up. So genetic versus environment. that's where the behavior is, because pure environment would be pure gut flora, and genetic would be the monkey. Yeah. So you would have a base of food intake that is based on the monkey, which is your genetic makeup, and based on the bacteria, which is the bacteria that you get from the outside. The two mixing together gives you a person, and that person needs to eat a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild.
And then after that, I'd be curious to see if he changes over time or not. Because humans didn't travel as much as we do now, right? So that has changed things as well. But so maybe that's what all our DNA mapping for what you should eat comes from. But that's only one side of the story.
Yeah.
Then you have your gut flora.
We're only checking the monkey.
Exactly. We need to check the bacteria. But I bet you between the two, then you could start to have an idea. And then if we could have that and then mix it with the nutrition protocol about this is how you should eat based on your nervous system, right? Because nervous system is not just the autonomic, it's also
kind
the
of about the
enteric.
when and the what and all of it.
Well, the when, there's going to be the part that is the autonomic, that's the when and everything, but then there's going to be the why, which is the enteric. So the play between the two with the protocol and the food that you should use for that protocol, imagine what we could do with that.
Yeah, and what's cool is that sounds complicated.
No.
But what it really is once you're moving in that system, it's super easy because you're just doing what feels right.
Yeah, anyway, and by the way, we already know how the protocol is. So now basically you do a gut flora test, right, which I'll do, and then I'll do a DNA test, and then I'll see the relationship between the three, and then I'll try. And then after 3 months, I'll come here and explain how it went. I'll do that. I'll do the DNA test for food, allergies and stuff like that. I'll do the gut flora, and I'll see what I've been doing with my protocol, what I naturally gravitated toward, and now I'll start to play with that. And then I'll tell people what I saw, and then if that works well, we'll put everybody on it.
And speaking of the slow-moving wheels of science, when are they gonna be moving forward with that group at the university?
September. 6th. Yeah.
Okay, so it's basically gonna be forever.
8-9 months. Yeah, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of our students.
Yeah, we'll be able to kind of be a part of that process, which will be cool.
We'll have the study in a year.
Yeah.
Not before. So like, go bite me, sue me. We'll have that basically academic thing that everybody's waiting for in a year. But in the meantime, I'm going to take our students, put them through the stuff, so that when we have those 90 people, we can start playing with that. Because she has main students, and then on top of other students, part of the other class and everything. Yeah, exactly. So we'll take a few of them that she sees on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And then when the next year starts, we'll put all 90 on it.
Yeah.
By then, we can do a DNA gut flora test first, trying to find what food they respond better to, because they're all Dutch. So I'd be very curious to see the one that are traditionally Dutch in the sense like ancestors, here since like fucking 500 years, and see how all the stuff works.
Very cool.
Because you get the blood type, but obviously that's not enough. By the way, there's a diet done just on the blood type. Right? It seems that there's an enteral type of gut flora as well. Yeah. So that means that you could start to direct towards things that are, better in that sense for you. But I'm going to do it from an anthropological perspective, like regional foods for you based on your DNA profile and gut flora profile, and see where that goes.
Wild.
That should be fun. But no matter what, remember, we are venom.
That's it. That's how we sign off. So.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week. Julien can be found at StrongFit1 on Instagram, strongfit.com. There's we don't sell Funkos yet. I also looked into getting getting a custom one made for you, and it was a little out of my price range.
But maybe people now understand better that drawing from Christian.
Yes.
That might have been a little. But now you understand the drawing better.
That might be the cover image for this episode, I think, too. But
yes, I agree.
But anyway, strongfit.com. There's all the seminars. If you want to take the deep dive in the nervous system and nutrition stuff.
That's on March 2nd.
Yep. I don't know if they'll have this by then, but there will be others.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
Yeah. So if the one in March isn't going to work for you, there will be more. So
there'll be more.
But keep your eyes out for that one. That's where the deepest dive into this stuff is going to be.
Yes, it's only the workshop. Yeah. I won't go into the seminar, but I will go into it in the workshop.
Yeah. And in the seminar, we skim over some of these subjects because all of them kind of apply. But it's very tough to go way deep into the gut.
But at the same time, if you ask me,
when we're trying to teach you how to hinge.
But if you ask me, I might go there. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So if you come to the seminar and want to jam up everybody's afternoon, Ask about the
I'm
gut
not
flora.
entirely against it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening. You can find me on Instagram at Tyler F. and Stone, and also StrongFit Equipment on Instagram is out there. Sandbags and all that stuff at strongfitequipment.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys.